Ocarina of Time Randomizer is a lot of fun, and if you've never tried it yourself, I'm hoping this video will help you get started with creating, playing, and eventually beating your first seed. It'll be aimed at complete beginners with no prior experience with Ocarina of Time Randomizer, focusing on creating a basic skill set as well as introducing you to some of the tools to help you out. There are already a ton of resources out there for both new and experienced players of Randomizer, and we'll be sharing some of those in this video, but most of them are in the form of 3+ hour live streams, and the quantity of information can be a bit overwhelming. So I wanted to try and condense it down into something shorter and cater to beginners as much as possible. If you're an experienced player and you have some tips to share with us newbies or errors to point out, feel free to share your knowledge in the comments. Let's start with the term randomizer, because what exactly is randomized? Basically, it means that all items received from chests and quests, as well as items in freestanding locations, are shuffled around. There are a couple of exceptions to this rule, but we'll get into those a bit later on. Also randomized are the dungeon rewards, like stones and medallions, as well as the songs you acquire throughout the entire game. There's no change in the landscape or locations of chests and NPCs. It's generally advised that you've defeated Ganon at least once in the vanilla game before trying OOT Randomizer, just to get familiar with the basic game. There are options to change the scope of the randomization. For example, rewards from Skulltulas and cows as well as shops can be shuffled. However, this is not recommended when you're just starting out. I won't be discussing all of the options, but if you're interested, there's a great video by the Zelda Speedruns channel on what ROM you'll need and what all the different settings do. If you're anything like me, you've most likely played and finished this game a dozen times already. But playing the randomizer is like introducing a brand new puzzle that spans the entire game. Even on my first rando seed, which took me several days to beat, I made a lot of small and fun discoveries about the base game. I never knew how many chests were hidden in the different areas, and the randomizer makes every single one of them important. I also felt very clever when I arrived at Death Mountain Crater without a hookshot, but managed to cross the broken bridge with hover boots. Having certain late game items unlocked in early dungeons can enable you to do some very fun tricks. Lastly, I always love seeing new players react to NPCs in the first area, rewarding them with an item to beat one of the bosses in the later dungeons. Though people often find out about rando in a speedrun setting, like a ZFG speedrun, it's an experience that lends itself very well to a casual playthrough. And I encourage all new players to take their sweet time on their first seed and just enjoy the ride. It's also important to note that the randomizer is not completely random. Every generated seed is built in a way that enables the player to beat it without the use of cheats or glitches. We'll get into what systems are put in place to achieve this later in the video. To prevent yourself from getting stuck completely, make sure you generate a seed with a spoiler log. The spoiler log contains a playthrough section that shows the order in which items can be obtained to beat the seed. Bear in mind, however, that this should not be read as the only way to beat a seed. It's intended to prove the seed is beatable. Whenever you get stuck, you can check the spoiler log for items that you've missed. The spoiler log can be downloaded when generating your ROM, or looked up by filling the seed number in the URL of your browser. At this point, you should know enough to start playing, so if you just want to get started generating a seed, go here. However, there's a few topics that are really good to discuss beforehand to help you on your way. When you create a seed, there are a couple of settings on the main rules tab that set logic in place. The TLDR on logic is that it keeps a seed from being unbeatable. If that's all you want to know, feel free to skip to the end of this section. Here's a bit more of an in-depth explanation. Setting closed forest will force players to clear Deku Tree before being able to head into Hyrule Field and other adjacent areas. The seed will make sure that all item rewards needed to beat the Deku Tree are available from the first sphere of checks. Spheres are a conceptual explanation of how things become available to you as you collect more items, and the first collection of checks is often referred to as Sphere 0. If you've collected the Slingshot, Shield and Kakiri Sword, Deku Tree is in Logic. After you've defeated Goma and acquired the first dungeon reward, checks in Market and Kakariko Village are in Logic. There's a few reasons why discussing logic is important, mainly because depending on your settings, there's a chance you're overlooking certain checks that are required to beat the seed. But the main reason I'm bringing up this subject is because it's important to optimally use your map tracker. Speaking of which, there's no shame in getting some help on your randomizer runs. In fact, many advanced players that participate in races still use tools like notes and, more importantly, map trackers. Map trackers are tools that allow users to check off locations and quests that they've visited. One of the great things about these tools is as you gain more items, the tracker will show you which checks become available to you. Checks refer to chests, quests to complete, and other events that grant you an item or a song. Personally, I use a browser tracker called trackoot.net. And like everything with Rando, this thing takes some getting used to. Here's a quick way of setting it up, without getting too deep into the tool itself. When starting a new seed, you'll be greeted with a prompt. Click the Upload Spoiler button and make sure Load Settings from Spoiler and Load Randomized Settings from Spoiler are selected. Click the button on the left of the prompt to upload your spoiler log and click Submit. Now that you have access to your tracker, we'll need to set all dungeons to vanilla settings. This tracker can also be used from Master Quest Rando, but obviously that's not what we're going for here. Once you load up your save, fill in the starting items and you're ready to go. You won't be getting all your help from external tools though. The gossip stones in-game have been modified to give you hints regarding locations of important items. And you won't need the Mask of Truth to hear what they have to say. It's a fun new mechanic that helps out big time since there's a lot of these gossip stones spread around Hyrule. By the way, you can see all the gossip stones on your tracker as well by clicking here. Most importantly are the naming item hints and the foolish hints. Foolish hints, or barren hints as they're often called, tell you which locations contain no progression items like the hookshot, bomb bag or iron boots. The checks in these areas can be completely ignored. There are different hint systems to choose from when generating a seed. Some will give you clear hints like specific locations about specific items, but others can be a little bit more vague, telling you which locations hold items needed to reach specific bosses. It's generally a good idea to write these hints down as you find them, especially regarding progression items like bombs and the hookshot.
If you've gained access to Ganon's castle but haven't found the light arrows yet, the big doofus actually tells you where to find it before fighting you.
To help out beginners, there's a nice preset with some very accessible settings. However, there's a few adjustments that I'd suggest to make your first seed a little bit more fun and accessible. Assuming that you have a ROM ready, head over to the randomizer in the browser and click Play Now. In the first tab, called ROM Options, make sure you're creating a spoiler log with this seed by checking the associated switch. Then head over to the preset section and select the beginner default preset. Next up, in the main rules tab, under the Shuffle Dungeon Items section, there's an option to start with maps and compasses. I would recommend turning this on, since it helps a lot to know where certain chests are in the dungeon without needing to find the map first. Then, under the Other tab, head over to the Time Saver section and select Skip some minigame phases. This will allow you to receive 2 checks available from Danpe's Race and Horseback Archery, preventing you from having to play the minigame twice even if you fulfilled all the conditions from the 2 checks available. In the Miscellaneous section, select the Hint Distribution and set it to Very Strong. Now these last 2 checks are not very important, but they can be a lot of fun. Randomizer allows you to randomize certain cosmetics, sound effects and music. Make any changes that look fun to you here. Now you're all set to generate your first seed. At the bottom of the screen, click Generate Seed. All that's left to do is select your ROM and make sure to turn off Override Original Cosmetics if you've made any changes in the previous menu. So you've generated your first seed and you've spawned into Kakiri Forest. What now? Well, explore. See what parts are available to you and what early checks grant you. The beginner preset keeps the early game pretty similar to the vanilla game, so it's a good idea to just play the game as you remember it and let the rando element hit you when it does. Just make sure to keep track of your hints and completed checks on your map tracker. One especially great way to start is by completing some of the locations that require little to no items. These locations are Lon Lon Ranch after you receive Zelda's letter, which holds 2 items and a song, the market to complete the shooting range and the nighttime only Richard the Dog quest, Kakariko Village with the chicken quest and the open grotto, and lastly Lake Hylia's fishing quest and the open grotto just outside the fences in Hyrule Field. It's also a good idea to pay a visit to the Temple of Time. The altar will show you which dungeons grant you stones and which ones grant you medals. This can be good to do because some medallions give you access to specific checks. For example, visiting the Temple of Time after collecting the Forest Medallion will grant you a song. As the altar will tell you, you'll need to find 6 medallions to build the bridge to Ganon's castle. However, stone dungeons might contain an important item for you to progress. When you've acquired some of your first progression items, it's time to start figuring out which dungeons can either be completed entirely or partially.
You most likely won't be able to clear an area on your first visit, so expect having to come back later after you've acquired more progression items. If you get completely stumped, feel free to check the spoiler log for any specific item locations. If you're having a hard time finding your way through a seed, know that you're not alone. Here's a couple of things I wish I knew when I was playing my first seed. When playing your first seed of Randomizer, there can be a couple of questions that pop up. One of the overwhelming feelings I had was that the game soft-locked me, but this is pretty much never the case. It's more likely that the randomizer is working a little bit differently than expected. One specific exception I remember vividly is regarding the Deku Salesman. In the beginning preset, items sold by Deku Salesmen are not randomized, at least most of them. There are 3 Deku Salesmen whose item rewards are included in the randomizer, these being one at the Fence Grotto in front of Lake Hylia, and 2 in the Lost Woods, one near the bridge that leads to Hyrule Field, and one in the grotto under the boulder near Sacred Forest Meadow. Second, you're not required to collect the 3 stones received from beating dungeons in order to open the Door of Time. Finding the Song of Time is the only requirement to open the door and collect the Master Sword to become an adult. Lastly, there are some items that are not randomized. A few examples are the Ocarina handed to you by Saria, the egg that Malon gives you in front of Hyrule Castle, the letter that Zelda gives you after completing the castle stealth section, and the Ocarina of Time. There's a very helpful FAQ as well as a page on specific locations on the Ocarina of Time Randomizer wiki, which I will link in the description. It can be extremely helpful when you get stuck. Lastly, you can always ask the ZOoTR community to help you out on their Discord server. Once you've beaten your first seed and you're ready for more, there's a couple of options to choose from. My advice would be to load the Easy preset. This preset has a couple of time saves that allow you to progress through the seed a bit faster. For example, it grants you the reward given to you after the castle stealth section from the start, meaning you can skip having to talk to Malon and Talon at the castle, as well as having to sneak into the castle. Some other changes include the Door of Time being open, which means you can change to Adult Link a lot sooner. You can check out all the available time saves in the other tab on the randomizer generator. There's some really nice features, like being able to skip the tower escape scene, call Epona as soon as you get Epona's song without needing to finish the race, and spawning scarecrows when pulling out the ocarina. Lastly, you can exclude checks that you don't enjoy playing on the detailed logic page. The Easy preset will have a couple of checks excluded already, such as the 40 and 50 sculptural rewards, the Mask of Truth quest, and the 1500 points requirement for horseback archery. There's also a collective of rando players that have set up a new rule set called Bunnyhood, which caters to beginners even more. This rule set allows you to access the bridge with any 5 dungeon rewards. And since you start out with 1 dungeon reward in your inventory, you only need to beat 4 dungeons. If you want a bit more of a challenge, you can try out the Season 5 Racing preset. This one also has some great features enabled, like chest size matches content, which shows you a big chest only when it contains a major item and labels key chests a different color. However, be aware that the logic might require you to know a couple of simple tricks. If you're unsure how to do these tricks or just need some general advice, the ZOoTR Discord has you covered. Hopefully this video has given you enough information to get started with Ocarina of Time Randomizer. Remember that developing any new skill will take practice, so if you're struggling with completing a seed without checking the spoiler log, know that it's all par for the course. Just stick with it, ask questions when in doubt, and over time, you will improve. My first seed took several days to complete, but with every seed you play, you learn more. The map tracker and notepads are tools that you have to get familiar with and learn how to use, and especially the map tracker might leave you a little confused at times. Fortunately, the OOT Randomizer and map tracker both have Discord servers with people willing to help you out. Before closing this video, I want to share a few more resources. The first is a series that is poorly titled Ocarina Improv, hosted by Games Done Quick. The title makes it harder to find, which is a shame because there's a lot of great information in this series, so definitely check that out. There's also a nice collection of short clips by Spacekat that shows some of the tricks and shortcuts. One extremely helpful tool to find out if a specific check is in Logic is with the Logic Compendium by Scatter. If you're wanting to get more into speedrunning this game, there's 2 great resources that stand out. One is a video with all the routing in each dungeon. It features some very difficult tricks as well, but it's nice to find a new trick here and there and practice getting through the dungeons faster. The second video is discussing routing and decision making for racing. It's pretty old, but most of the information is still very relevant, like the importance of collecting songs. Lastly, there's a PC port out for OOT called Ship of Harkinian. It features a ton of improvements like widescreen, reduced input lag, and gyro aiming.
And it even features a randomizer. It doesn't have as many features as the original OOT randomizer, but it's a lot of fun to play nonetheless. Alright, that's it for me. Thanks for watching.